Lydia's heart was racing with anticipation as she drove through the familiar streets of her son Javier's office district. At 62, she had learned to find joy in the simplest of things, and today she had prepared something special, a chocolate cake, Javier's favorite since he was a child. The thought of the smile on his face when he saw her waiting in his car made her feel light as air, like she was 16 again. Parking her car carefully in the corner of the lot, she noticed Javier's silver sedan sitting quietly, gleaming under the afternoon sun. A mischievous idea twinkled in her mind. She would hide in the back seat and jump out to surprise him. Lydia giggled softly to herself, her excitement bubbling up like a fountain. She slipped quietly into the sedan, crouching behind the front seats, careful not to make a sound. The leather smelled faintly of the new car scent, mixed with Javier's cologne, and her chest tightened in both anticipation and nostalgia. Minutes passed like hours. Lydia held her breath, straining to hear every footstep, every distant car engine. And then finally the car door opened. Javier slid into the driver's seat, and another person, someone she did not expect, took the passenger seat. Her heart stuttered as she recognized the voice. It was Raquel, Javier's wife. At first, Lydia smiled softly, thinking it was sweet they were leaving work together. But the words that followed froze her blood. "Are you absolutely sure no one will suspect anything when it happens?" Raquel's tone was chilling, cold, and calculated. Javier's voice replied, calm yet eerie, "We've planned this perfectly. She'll have a very natural accident. No one will question it when an older woman slips in her house." Lydia felt the air leave her lungs. The hands that had once held hers when he was a frightened little boy, the boy she had raised alone after his father passed away, were now conspiring against her. She pressed herself further down into the back seat, heart pounding so violently she feared it would burst through her chest. Her mind reeled. They spoke of selling her house, of using the money for themselves, of acting heartbroken at her funeral while secretly rejoicing. Alvin and Patricia, her older brother and his wife, were also part of this scheme. Every detail had been meticulously planned. The exact moment of her accident, how to stage it as a fall, even the emotions they would feign during the morning. Lydia stayed hidden, tears blurring her vision as the conversation continued. Raquel spoke with a disturbing excitement, dissecting the house Lydia had poured her life into. Every room filled with memories of sleepless nights, birthdays with meager funds but overflowing love, and afternoons spent helping Javier with his homework. It was all too much. Her life's sacrifices, her dedication, her love. They had been plotting to erase it with a single cruel act. When the two finally left the car, Lydia waited, shaking and numb, before she dared to move. She emerged not as the mother who had entered, full of warmth and trust, but as someone transformed by betrayal and horror. The loving woman who had dreamed only of her son's happiness was gone. In her place was a calculated, determined force, fueled by the knowledge of her family's treachery. Every memory of sacrifice flashed through her mind. Selling her wedding ring to buy Javier his first computer, working countless hours to ensure he had an education, always putting his needs before her own. And now, these people, those she loved most, were planning to murder her for money. That night, Lydia sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the conversation replaying endlessly in her mind. Every syllable, every plan, every casual cruelty cut her heart. The initial shock slowly transformed into a steely resolve. If they wanted to play a dangerous game, she could too, but she needed a plan, one they would never anticipate. And so, as the night deepened, Lydia's grief and fear began to shift into clarity. She realized survival required cunning, patience, and a willingness to embrace the unimaginable. If she was to confront this darkness, she would need to become something she had never imagined. A master of deception, hiding in plain sight, and watching as those who had betrayed her revealed the full extent of their greed and malice. For now, however, she simply allowed herself one bitter, quiet thought. Her life, her love, and her sacrifices had led to this moment, but she would not end it here. She would endure, she would fight, and she would make them understand the weight of their betrayal. Lydia spent the next few days in a haze, replaying every word, every tone, every pause from that fateful conversation in the car. Sleep eluded her, And when she did manage to close her eyes, nightmares of Javier's cold, calculating expression haunted her. It was as if the boy she had raised, the boy whose small hand had once fit perfectly in hers, had been replaced by a stranger capable of orchestrating her murder. She knew she could not confront Javier directly, not yet. They had proven themselves cunning, meticulous in their plotting. Any hint of suspicion on her part could force them to accelerate their plan. Lydia realized that survival required patience, observation, and strategy. Her first step was to gather evidence, proof of their intentions that could protect her legally, emotionally, and morally. Beatrice, Lydia's longtime friend and a retired nurse with a steady hand and sharp mind, became her first confidant. Lydia recounted the conversation in meticulous detail, her voice trembling at times, but her eyes blazing with determination. Beatrice listened, her expression darkening with each revelation. "This is monstrous," Beatrice whispered, her hands tightening around Lydia's. "You need to document everything. Every visit, every call, every suspicious conversation. They can't succeed if you have proof." Together, they devised a plan. Cameras would be installed discreetly throughout Lydia's home, capturing the comings and goings of her family, the subtle discussions, the way they examined her belongings, the micro-expressions that revealed their greed. They also discussed the unthinkable. Lydia would need to let them believe their plan was proceeding without interruption, that she remained unaware. Any premature move could tip the scales in their favor. As the days passed, Lydia's mind sharpened. She observed Javier at family gatherings, noting his gestures, the way he interacted with Raquel, and the quiet complicity of Alvin and Patricia. The smallest cues, an exchanged glance, a forced smile, a slight hesitation in speech, became pieces of a puzzle she was slowly assembling. One afternoon, while cleaning the office where Patricia worked, Lydia overheard a conversation that confirmed her worst fears. Patricia's voice, dripping with sarcasm and entitlement, carried across the room. "Lydia has always been so selfish with her money," Patricia said to an unseen interlocutor. "It's time for the family to get what they deserve. That stingy old woman is going to die sooner or later. Why wait? We need that money too." Her blood ran cold. Alvin's eyes, cold and calculating when he heard Patricia speak, revealed no gratitude for the sacrifices Lydia had made to support the family. Instead, there was resentment, envy, and a sense of entitlement that made her chest ache. Every dollar she had earned, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, viewed by them as a personal affront. Yet Lydia was not powerless. She began to catalog everything: phone calls, letters, financial records, and behavioral patterns. Her life became a delicate balance of outward normalcy and covert vigilance. She maintained her usual warmth and cheer with Javier and the others, all the while watching, recording, and planning. The contrast between her internal turmoil and her outward composure was stark. She greeted Javier at the table with the same tenderness as always, smiled politely at Raquel, and even offered family advice that she would later use to gauge reactions. But inside, a storm of betrayal, anger, and calculation raged. Every conversation, every interaction, was an opportunity to learn, to anticipate, to fortify herself against the treachery around her. As Lydia pieced together the web of deceit, she discovered the depth of their greed. The family had meticulously charted how they would divide her estate, how they would stage mourning, how they would present themselves to the world as grieving relatives. The audacity was staggering, yet it also gave Lydia power. Knowledge of their plan was now a weapon in her hands, a tool to turn the tables on those who had sought to destroy her. Night after night, she lay awake, replaying the recordings in her mind, imagining the confrontation she would someday orchestrate. It would not be violent, not in the traditional sense, but it would be precise, undeniable, and humiliating in the most satisfying way. She would reveal the truth to the world, showing the extent of their betrayal, and in that revelation, she would reclaim not just her property and dignity, but her very identity as a mother, a woman, and a survivor. The storm outside mirrored her inner resolve. Rain lashed against the windows, the wind rattled the frames, and yet Lydia felt a sense of calm clarity. Every strategy, every precaution, every hidden camera, and every careful observation brought her closer to a plan that could outmaneuver even the most cunning adversaries. By the end of the second week, Lydia knew she was ready for the next phase. She would appear vulnerable, unsuspecting, and ordinary, the perfect disguise for someone aware of a lethal conspiracy. And when the time came, she would expose everything, forcing her family to confront the monstrous consequences of their ambition and greed. Lydia's eyes glinted in the dim lamplight as she rehearsed the steps silently. She was no longer just a mother who had loved unconditionally. She was a strategist, a protector, and soon, the architect of a revelation that would shake the very foundation of her family. The first chapter of her revenge was observation, and Lydia was already several moves ahead. The night was quiet now, but the war had just begun, and in the shadows of her carefully monitored home, she felt the cold comfort of one truth: knowledge, patience, and a meticulous plan were stronger than betrayal, fear, or even familial love gone awry. Lydia woke the next morning with a sense of purpose she had never felt in years. The horror of what she had overheard had transformed into a cold, calculating determination. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the street outside her home as though every passerby could carry a clue, a sign, or a threat. Her plan was simple in concept, but complicated in execution. She needed to let her family believe that everything was proceeding according to their design, while she secretly gathered irrefutable proof of their intentions. Every smile, every polite greeting, every ordinary conversation would now serve as camouflage for her surveillance. The first step was ensuring that her home was fully under observation. She contacted Beatrice, whose medical expertise and attention to detail would prove invaluable. Together, they installed discreet cameras in rooms her family frequented most: the living room, kitchen, and even hallways leading to hidden storage spaces where Lydia kept personal items of value. Each camera was positioned to capture not just movement, but expression, gestures, and subtle interactions. By mid-morning, Lydia received a text from Javier. "Mom, thinking of stopping by this afternoon to discuss some paperwork. See you soon." She smiled politely at her phone, but inside her mind was racing. Every visit, every casual conversation could reveal more of their intentions. She had to stay calm, composed, and above all, unsuspecting. When Javier and Raquel arrived, Lydia welcomed them with warmth, masking the storm raging within. They chatted casually about work, recent errands, and trivial matters. But Lydia's focus was on every nuance: how Raquel's eyes lingered on her jewelry, how Javier's smile did not reach his eyes, and how both of them exchanged subtle nods that betrayed their complicity. As they moved through the living room, Lydia noticed Raquel linger near the mantel, fingers brushing over framed photographs and small heirlooms. Her heart sank, but she maintained her composure, asking innocuous questions as if she had not noticed a thing. Beatrice's earlier instructions echoed in her mind: observe, record, and never let them know you're aware. Later, Lydia excused herself under the pretense of preparing tea. Behind the closed kitchen door, she whispered into a small recording device hidden beneath the counter, capturing every word, every tone, every pause for future evidence. She moved with the precision of someone performing a well-rehearsed dance, nothing out of place, nothing suspicious, but every step calculated to extract the maximum information. By evening, she had compiled hours of recordings, notes, and observations. Patterns emerged: Javier's meticulous planning, Raquel's cold enthusiasm, and the subtle ways Alvin and Patricia manipulated situations to reinforce their narrative of entitlement. Lydia's initial shock had transformed into a methodical understanding of their psyche. She knew that fear alone would not protect her, only foresight and preparation would. In the quiet hours of the night, Lydia reviewed the recordings with Beatrice. Every interaction, every smirk, every whispered conversation was examined, transcribed, and analyzed. Beatrice, though shocked, could not hide her admiration for Lydia's composure and strategic thinking. "You've turned a moment of terror into power," Beatrice said softly. "Most people would crumble, but you've learned to fight from the shadows. You're ready for the next step." Lydia nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on her shoulders. She knew that the next phase of her plan would be the most dangerous. She would have to create the illusion of vulnerability while secretly orchestrating a countermeasure that would ensure not only her survival, but also the exposure of their betrayal. She began drafting a timeline, plotting the movements of her family members, the likely scenarios they would attempt, and her corresponding responses. Every detail mattered: the time of arrival, the routes taken, the likely distractions, and even the smallest habits that could be exploited. The house became a chessboard, with each camera a sentinel, each observation a calculated move toward checkmate. As the night deepened, Lydia allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Memories of Javier as a child surfaced. The nights she stayed awake caring for his fevered brow, the sacrifices she made to ensure he had every opportunity, and the love she had poured into raising him. Anger burned within her, but it was tempered by resolve. She would not let grief or bitterness cloud her judgment. By the time the clock struck midnight, Lydia had outlined her strategy in meticulous detail. Every contingency had been considered, every potential threat analyzed. She was ready for the next phase, the subtle, calculated maneuvers that would begin to turn the tables on those who had plotted her demise. She lay down in bed, finally allowing her body to rest, though her mind remained alert. In the quiet darkness, Lydia felt a flicker of anticipation. The first moves had been made and the game had begun. She was no longer merely a mother in danger. She was a strategist, a silent observer, and a force that her family could neither predict nor control. As she drifted toward a restless sleep, Lydia repeated a mantra to herself: knowledge is power, patience is strength, and the truth will have its reckoning. The journey ahead would be treacherous, but she was ready to face it, one calculated step at a time. The morning sunlight filtered through Lydia's living room blinds, casting long, thin stripes across the polished floor. The day felt ordinary to anyone looking in, but inside Lydia, a storm of preparation and anticipation churned. She had spent weeks watching, listening, and documenting every move of her family. Now it was time for her first counterstrike, a subtle maneuver to unsettle those plotting against her while gathering the evidence she would need to ensure justice. She prepared breakfast with meticulous care, leaving nothing out of place. Everything was as she usually did, warm and inviting. When Javier and Raquel arrived, they were met with Lydia's usual cheer, masking the storm of anger and calculation beneath. She welcomed them warmly, but every word, every smile was measured, a careful balance of normalcy and silent defiance. As they settled in, Lydia's eyes tracked Raquel, noting how her fingers lingered too long on the silverware, on the edges of picture frames, and on the display of jewelry she had inherited. Javier sat nearby, his posture perfect, but his eyes flickered with the subtle arrogance of someone who believed he was 2 steps ahead. Lydia's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of the game. "Mom, we thought we'd discuss the house and some of the legal paperwork today," Javier said, voice smooth, rehearsed. Lydia smiled. "Of course, but why don't we have some tea first? Let's make it comfortable." Her voice was calm, almost soothing, but beneath it lay a sharp edge. Every interaction, she reminded herself, was part of a larger strategy. As Raquel and Javier moved toward the living room sofa, Lydia excused herself to check the oven, though in reality, she was planting a small, inconspicuous recording device near the doorway. She had learned to anticipate their behaviors, where they would linger, what they would touch, and how they would speak when they thought no one was watching. By mid-afternoon, the first subtle effects of her countermeasures began to appear. Lydia had instructed Beatrice to monitor the cameras remotely and guide her through adjustments in real time. They were capturing not only the actions, but the intentions, the subtle cues that betrayed their greed. Raquel's hand lingered over Lydia's jewelry box for just a second too long. Javier's eyes darted toward the safe hidden in the closet, and Alvin's voice, when he called later under the pretense of casual conversation, held a tension that Lydia recognized immediately. She responded with perfect normalcy, discussing trivial matters, asking polite questions, and offering mild advice about their investments. Each word was calculated, designed to keep them off balance while she absorbed every gesture, every micro-expression. Lydia's mind raced, calculating probabilities, preparing for contingencies, and recording everything for the ultimate exposure. Later, when the family thought she had retired for the evening, Lydia reviewed the day's recordings with Beatrice. Every smirk, every whispered remark, every exchange of subtle signals was meticulously logged. Patterns began to emerge, showing not only the depth of their plan, but also the cracks in their composure. Every lie they told, every attempt to appear innocent, created a roadmap for Lydia's next steps. She realized that the key to her survival was patience. Any overt action could alert them, forcing them to accelerate their plan or change tactics. Instead, she would appear unaware, compliant, and even vulnerable, while silently orchestrating the eventual unraveling of their plot. The night brought no sleep, only strategy sessions with Beatrice, refining their approach, adjusting camera angles, and scripting the narrative that Lydia would reveal when the time was right. They rehearsed how to present the recordings, how to capture reactions, and how to maintain the facade of ordinary life until the climactic revelation. In those quiet hours, Lydia allowed herself a private, fleeting smile. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, she felt a glimmer of control. She was no longer merely a potential victim. She had become the strategist, the observer, the silent force preparing to turn the tables. She imagined the day when Javier and Raquel would see the full extent of her vigilance, their carefully plotted plans laid bare for the world to witness. The idea fueled her determination, sharpening her mind, fortifying her resolve. And deep inside, she knew one truth above all: no matter how cold, calculated, or deceptive they had been, she would outthink them at every step. As she settled into bed that night, Lydia's thoughts were clear and focused. The first counterstrike had been subtle, almost imperceptible to them, but it had shifted the balance. From this moment onward, every interaction, every conversation, every movement of her family would be a calculated step toward exposing their true nature. And in the shadows of her home, with Beatrice as her ally and her cameras silently recording every moment, Lydia felt the quiet satisfaction of someone finally seizing control of a game that had begun with betrayal, but would end with justice. The morning sun had barely risen when Lydia felt the familiar mixture of fear and determination tighten in her chest. Today was the day she would execute the most audacious part of her plan, to fake her own death convincingly and use it as a lens to observe the true nature of her family. Every detail had to be perfect, every gesture calculated. For the illusion to succeed, Beatrice arrived promptly, carrying a small, black medical bag filled with equipment Lydia didn't fully understand, but trusted completely. She had studied Lydia's instructions and rehearsed every step of the process. Together, they reviewed the plan for the 100th time. The goal was not merely survival. It was to capture the unvarnished truth of the people who had plotted her demise. "You're calm," Beatrice said softly, examining Lydia's pulse. "You're ready." Lydia forced a small smile. Calm doesn't mean naive. It means I know exactly what's at stake. They began by preparing the living room, arranging furniture, and placing Lydia in a position that would appear natural for an unexpected collapse. Beatrice carefully monitored her vital signs, while Lydia focused on steadying her breathing, allowing herself to become the perfect illusion of someone lifeless. Every shallow rise of her chest, every flicker of her fingers, had to be imperceptible yet controlled. When the paramedics arrived, Lydia's act was flawless. Her body lay still, her expression serene, and Beatrice's subtle manipulations ensured that even trained eyes would be deceived. The paramedics pronounced her dead within minutes, and Lydia's heart raced, not from fear of discovery, but from the thrill of executing a plan that had taken weeks of preparation. Once the house was empty, Lydia retreated to a hidden room in Beatrice's basement. Cameras installed throughout her home allowed her to observe every room, every movement, every reaction in real time. The house, once a place of love and memory, now became a stage for revelation. She watched as Raquel and Javier arrived, ostensibly shocked by the news, yet their expressions quickly betrayed anticipation and calculation. They moved with the precision of people who believed they were about to inherit, quietly discussing what to take first, what to examine, and how to manage the narrative of grief for outsiders. Alvin and Patricia arrived shortly after, their voices filled with sorrow that masked eagerness. Every gesture, every glance, every whispered word was captured by Lydia's hidden cameras, transforming into evidence that could not be disputed. It was horrifying, but Lydia felt no fear, only clarity and resolve. She observed Raquel opening her jewelry box, examining each piece as if valuing them for their potential resale rather than sentimental significance. Patricia's sarcasm cut through the quiet, commenting on what was actually worth money. Javier's phone calls arranged the swift sale of the house, his voice cold and professional, with no mention of mourning or respect for what had been. Hours passed, each one more revealing than the last. Lydia watched as her family plotted, schemed, and justified their betrayal, all under the illusion that she was gone forever. The emotions they feigned for public appearances were empty, rehearsed, and grotesque. Through her cameras, Lydia began to document everything: names, dates, actions, conversations. Each recording, each note became a weapon of truth she could wield when the time came. She saw the cracks in their composure, moments where greed overtook caution, and every slip was another thread to unravel their plan. At night, when the house fell silent, Lydia allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of her sacrifices, her endless work, and the love she had poured into raising Javier. She thought of the betrayal, of the faces she had trusted, and the audacity of their ambition. And yet she felt a new kind of power: knowledge, vigilance, and the certainty that she was finally in control. This was no longer merely about survival. It was about justice, exposure, and reclaiming the dignity in life that had been threatened by those she had once loved unconditionally. In the hidden darkness of Beatrice's basement, Lydia smiled for the first time in weeks. Her plan was unfolding perfectly, and she was watching every move of those who had underestimated her. The days ahead would be long and challenging, but Lydia was ready. Every conversation, every action, every decision her family made would be recorded, analyzed, and eventually exposed. She was no longer the potential victim. They were the prey, and the stage was set for their reckoning. Days passed in a strange, surreal rhythm. Lydia remained hidden in Beatrice's basement, yet every detail of her home, once so familiar, played out on the screens before her like a live theater of betrayal. Each family member moved with the arrogance of those who believed their plot was flawless. Every conversation, every gesture, every calculated smile added pieces to Lydia's growing arsenal of proof. She watched Raquel as she meticulously catalogued Lydia's belongings, speaking quietly into her phone about potential buyers, and assessing the monetary value of heirlooms as though sentimental significance was irrelevant. Javier oversaw the arrangements with chilling composure, his voice precise, controlled, and devoid of emotion, discussing real estate agents, quick sales, and legal loopholes to expedite their plans. Alvin and Patricia, eager to assert their share, were visibly intoxicated by the sense of entitlement, their greed outweighing caution. Lydia's pulse was steady, her expression calm, but inside, a storm of anger and satisfaction brewed. She meticulously logged everything, every word, every action, every tiny misstep. The patterns emerging from these interactions revealed not only their intentions, but also the depth of their moral corruption. One afternoon, as Raquel and Patricia met in a downtown cafe, Lydia observed them via hidden cameras and listened with rapt attention. Raquel sipped her latte, speaking with casual delight. "You know the best part of all this? That we finally got rid of that burden. Javier can live without constant pressure or guilt. It's perfect," Patricia nodded enthusiastically. "And no one will ever suspect a thing." Alvin's planning made it foolproof. Lydia's heart clenched, but only briefly. The fear that had gripped her initially had long been replaced by purpose. Every word spoken, every plan executed, was now a thread she could pull to unravel the entire scheme. That evening, she consulted with Beatrice to review the footage and outline the next stage. The strategy was clear. She needed to confront them publicly, but on her own terms, ensuring that the truth would be undeniable and the consequences immediate. The cameras had captured not only the mechanics of their plan, but also their personalities, the arrogance, the cold calculation, the lack of conscience, that would make the exposure all the more devastating. But timing was critical. Lydia could not reveal herself too soon, lest they adapt or attempt further manipulations. She began scripting a scenario in which she would reappear, alive and aware, with irrefutable evidence of their conspiracy. Every word, every gesture, every camera angle had to be precise. The confrontation had to maximize impact, both legally and psychologically. Meanwhile, Lydia continued her surveillance, noting small but significant details, the way Raquel checked the windows, the subtle signals between Javier and Patricia, the minor disagreements over the division of assets. These micro-interactions provided insight into the cracks in their armor, confirming that while they were meticulous, they were not infallible. As night fell, Lydia allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought of the sacrifices she had made for Javier, the sleepless nights, the money scrimped and saved, the love given without expectation. Her eyes softened at memories of his childhood laughter, his small achievements, and the warmth they once shared. Those memories fueled not only her resolve, but also a deep understanding of the stakes. This confrontation was not merely about money or revenge. It was about reclaiming the life and dignity that had been threatened by betrayal. She rehearsed the scenario silently, her entrance into the living room, the sequence of revelations, the recorded evidence projected for all to see. She imagined the shock, the disbelief, the terror on their faces as they realized their meticulously plotted scheme had been observed and documented from beginning to end. The plan was audacious, perhaps reckless, but Lydia felt an unshakable certainty. She had the knowledge, the preparation, and the patience to execute it flawlessly. And in the quiet darkness, as Beatrice monitored her screens, Lydia allowed herself a brief smile. The moment of truth was approaching, and when it arrived, the reckoning would be total. In that moment, Lydia felt not fear, but the clarity and calm of someone who had turned betrayal into power. Every action she had taken, every risk she had managed, every observation she had made, had led to this point. She was no longer merely a victim, she was the architect of her own justice, and the stage was set for a revelation that would shatter the carefully constructed illusion of loyalty and love within her family. The day dawned with an eerie calm. Lydia had spent the previous night rehearsing every word, every gesture, every detail of her planned confrontation. She knew that timing, precision, and psychological impact were crucial. Beatrice had coordinated with hidden cameras and audio feeds, ensuring that every second would be documented and visible, leaving no room for doubt or denial. Lydia entered her home quietly, moving with deliberate care. The living room was meticulously arranged to appear as it had before her death, an illusion that would maximize the shock and horror of her family when she revealed herself. Her heart, surprisingly, felt steady. This was no longer fear, but the focused energy of someone in command. Soon after, Javier, Raquel, Alvin, and Patricia arrived, each wearing the masks of grief and composure they had practiced countless times. Their faces, however, betrayed subtle signs of expectation. Small smirks, glances exchanged, the gleam of anticipation for the inheritance they thought was finally theirs. Lydia stood just out of sight, Beatrice whispering the final instructions into her earpiece. Remember, calm, deliberate, authoritative. You hold the power, the moment arrived. Lydia stepped into the room, her eyes scanning each face, her expression composed and unflinching. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Raquel's eyes widened first, the color draining from her face as she realized the impossibility. Lydia was alive. Javier froze mid-step, hands trembling slightly, as disbelief spread across his features. Alvin's jaw tightened. Patricia's eyes flickered between shock and panic. You thought you could play me? Lydia's voice was calm, deliberate, echoing in the stunned silence. You planned my death, calculated every detail, and even involved my own brother. And you believed no one would know. Her words landed like blows, the weight of truth unmistakable. Then, with a nod to Beatrice, she activated the hidden displays throughout the room. Footage from the cameras played automatically. Raquel's whispers about the perfect plan, Javier's cold discussion of selling the house immediately, Patricia's casual remarks about dividing Lydia's inheritance, and Alvin's sarcastic comments masked as concern. Every detail was recorded, time-stamped, and undeniable. Raquel's hand flew to her mouth, the shock turning into a pale, almost physical horror. This isn't possible," she stammered. Javier's voice cracked, the smooth veneer of control slipping. "Mom, it's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like." Lydia interrupted, her gaze icy. "Do you hear yourselves? You plotted my death like it was a business transaction. You discussed my accident, my funeral, and how quickly you could profit from my life. That is exactly what it looks like." Patricia opened her mouth, but the recordings played on, drowning her words. Alvin's eyes darted between screens, realizing that the meticulous plan they thought flawless had been entirely exposed. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the soft hum of the displays. Lydia stepped closer, her voice calm yet unwavering. "I faked my death to observe your betrayal, to document every action, every word, every thought you believed hidden. And now the truth is undeniable. Your greed, your cruelty, your conspiracy, it is all on record." The room was a mix of shock, panic, and rage. Javier's hands shook as he fumbled with his phone, trying to delete messages or somehow salvage the situation, but Lydia's recordings were comprehensive. Every conversation, every glance, every tiny misstep had been captured and time-stamped. You wanted control, inheritance, money, at the expense of your mother's life, Lydia continued, stepping closer to Javier. And now the world is watching. The truth is here, undeniable and inescapable. At that moment, police officers and reporters, coordinated by Lydia and Beatrice, entered the room. The cameras capturing the confrontation for public broadcast ensured that the exposure was complete. Javier, Raquel, Alvin, and Patricia were left with no room for lies, no opportunity for denial. The conspiracy they had carefully crafted had crumbled, and Lydia's meticulous planning had ensured justice not only in legal terms, but in moral reckoning. For the first time in weeks, Lydia felt the profound satisfaction of control. The fear that had once gripped her was gone, replaced by a calm certainty that truth, preparation, and courage could overcome even the most insidious betrayal. Her family's faces, etched with horror, disbelief, and guilt, were a testament to the meticulous strategy and relentless vigilance that had brought her here. As she faced them, Lydia spoke the final words that encapsulated her victory. Family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by love, care, and loyalty. You betrayed all of these, and now the truth is undeniable. Justice will be served, and the world will know your cruelty. And with that, Lydia stepped back, letting the recordings and the law take their course. The long nightmare had ended, and she had emerged not as a victim, but as a force of truth, strategy, and resilience. The days after the confrontation were surreal. The public exposure of Javier, Raquel, Alvin, and Patricia's plot sent shockwaves through the community. Social media erupted with discussions, outrage, and support for Lydia. News outlets replayed clips from the hidden cameras, highlighting the cold precision of the betrayal and the courage of the mother who had outsmarted them all. For Lydia, the exposure was only the beginning. She watched as legal authorities processed the evidence she and Beatrice had gathered. Charges of conspiracy, attempted murder, and fraud were filed, and her family members faced both criminal and civil consequences. Every court appearance further cemented the truth, while Lydia remained poised, composed, and unwavering. The sense of vindication was profound, but more important was the liberation she felt. For decades, she had sacrificed everything for Javier: sleepless nights, long hours of work, and personal happiness, all to give him the best life possible. She had shielded him from guilt, hidden her sacrifices, and nurtured him with unconditional love. To discover that her son and family had plotted her demise was devastating, yet her cleverness and patience had ensured justice. In the aftermath, Lydia focused on rebuilding her life, creating a new family from those who had proven loyalty, love, and kindness. Gabrielle, a woman who had endured her own family's betrayal, became a sister and companion. Together, they cultivated a household full of laughter, mutual support, and warmth, qualities Lydia had longed for, but never fully experienced in her biological family. Her days were now filled with meaningful volunteer work, connecting with other women who had experienced betrayal, loss, or neglect. She shared her story openly, advocating for the recognition of maternal sacrifice and the importance of chosen family. Nights, once shadowed by fear and distrust, were now peaceful, filled with quiet reflection and satisfaction in having reclaimed her life. Even with justice served, Lydia allowed herself compassion for the son she had once adored. In court, Javier had apologized, tears in his eyes, yet Lydia remained firm. "You became someone who valued money over your mother's life," she said. "Perhaps these years will remind you of the boy you once were before greed consumed you." Her words were not vengeance, but truth. Lydia understood that true justice was measured not only in punishment, but in the restoration of self-respect and autonomy. Over time, Lydia's home became a sanctuary. The laughter of friends, the warmth of companionship, and the knowledge that she had outsmarted betrayal gave her a sense of peace she had never known. Letters from women across the country poured in, sharing their own stories of sacrifice and betrayal, finding hope and inspiration in Lydia's resilience. On quiet afternoons, Lydia would sit in her favorite armchair, a cup of tea in hand, reflecting on the journey from devastation to triumph. She understood now that family was not defined by blood, but by love, loyalty, and respect. Those who had betrayed her were confined by their greed and exposed to the world, while she thrived in the freedom of truth, strategy, and genuine connection. In the end, Lydia realized that her greatest legacy was not material wealth or the inheritance they had coveted. It was her courage, wisdom, and the life she reclaimed. The world had witnessed her story, but more importantly, she had reclaimed herself, proving that even in the face of betrayal, resilience, intelligence, and integrity could prevail. And so, at 65 years old, Lydia lived fully, surrounded by chosen family, laughter and love, knowing that the true measure of a life well lived was not the fortune left behind, but the courage to protect oneself, to act with wisdom, and to find real family in those who valued her for who she truly was. The story ended not with vengeance, but with liberation, dignity, and the profound knowledge that betrayal could be overcome, and that life, when lived wisely, could be more beautiful than Lydia had ever imagined.